Thank you for joining us for our August 2021 knit along. This is week 2. For week 2 we are working the cuff, and that includes the ribbing and the leg of our vintage Christmas stocking. This is our stocking sample for the knit along. It's a version of our traditional vintage stockings. As you can see, we knit it flat and then we do a seam up the side. All of our stockings are worked in the same manner, so you can use this tutorial for any of them. So you can see here, this is where our first 8 rows are. We do a color change here, and then for the rest of the week, we are going to do stockinette stitch, so knit on one side, purl on the other. And so we're going to finish this stocking and we're going to knit all the way down with a few decreases. We'll show you where the decreases are. You won't see decreases in the shape of a pattern in some of the other vintage stockings. You'll see them on a graph, which we don't have, but you know, it'll go through the same motions and the same stitches. We're going to end about here right before we work the heel. So we'll do the heel next week. So let's take a look at the colors we chose for this project. Our sample is done in Mary Maxim Starlet in the color Red Wine. We chose red wine for a few reasons. One is this really deep red that really has a really rich color, and then we also are using Mary Maxim Starlet in the color White. Obviously we're not using as much white as we are the red wine. Another color you can choose is Mary Maxim Starlet in the color Cardinal. Now the color Cardinal is the traditional Mary Maxim Christmas red. So those colors, especially this time of year, go flying off of our shelves. You can also choose Mary Maxim Starlet Sparkle. This is the color Ruby. This is also a really fun yarn to work with. We're going to start with Mary Maxim Starlet in the color White. This is the color we're casting on with. Now typically to knit stockings I would use a pair of single pointed needles. These are trim needles. They are size 8 5.00 millimeter needles. However, I have my cable trimmed cardigan on these, and when I knit with these I tend to tap the table too much and it feels just really awkward. So what's more important when you're knitting is that you're comfortable. So I chose to use these Likey circular needles, even though I would typically knit this in a single point needle. So these are the same size. These are size 8 5.00 millimeter needles. And this is what we'll use for this stocking. So let's start our cast on. When casting on, you're going to want an extra long tail. I'm kind of going to overdo it just a little bit, just in case. I'd rather have too much than not enough. All right, let's try that again. We are going to start our first knot and cast on to our circular needle. We are going to use the long tail cast on method for all of the skills and stitches that you'll need to complete this stocking. It is available in the blog post. So we have a few different items in the blog post. It is linked in the description of this video. You can seriously go at your own pace. And then there's extra support videos in the blog post. So if I'm moving too slow for you, please feel free to fast forward. If I'm moving too fast, you always have the option of pausing, and you can always go back and reference those videos for extra support. So when you're casting on, it's always important to make sure that your yarn can move up and down your needle freely and that you are comfortable with the knitting. We're going to start here with our knit to purl to rib what I like to do is I like to tuck my extra long tail underneath my left hand when I'm working. That way I don't knit that. It's always fun when you get to the end of your first row and realize you knit your tail instead of your working yarn. So here we are knitting 2 and then moving our yarn over to purl 2. If you're new to knitting, you always have to remember to move your yarn over when you're purling, or else you end up doing yarn overs and giving yourself extra stitches on your needles. And it also leaves nice holes, which, you know, we can call those design elements. So we are going a little faster here than we normally would. All right, I want to show you something I like to do. When I'm knitting, I like to frequently pause and make sure I'm knitting my ribs correctly. So you'll see me do that a few times during this video. I'll just stop and pause and count my stitches and make sure I've got 2 knits and 2 purls as a repeat. Sometimes I'll just not be thinking and end up doing, oh, what I did here. Let's go back. So I'm going to work back just a little bit. Take a couple of stitches out because I ended up doing 1 purl instead of 2. So we'll complete our second purl right here and then continue knitting in pattern. It's always good to stop and check that, especially when you're working your first row. When you're working subsequent rows, it's not as difficult to fix later on. But it seems to be a little bit more difficult the first row, and it's always good to get started on the right foot. Okay, we're just finishing our row 1 of knit 2, purl 2. So we're gonna knit the last few and then our last few purls. Oop, that fell off my needle. Slip it right back on and keep going. Okay, so now we turn. As you remember, probably from our video on knitting and purling, that knit and purl are 2 sides of the same coin, so to speak. They're opposites. So if we finished off on a purl on one side, we're going to start with a knit on the second. In that way, the first 7 rows are knit exactly the same. So this would be a good time to pause your work and meet us back when you finished, or you're almost finished with 7. So here we are at the end of our 7th row, and let's count them. So this is where we cast on. This is the 1st row, 2nd row, 3rd row, 4th row, 5th row, 6th row, and the 7th row is on our needles. So we're going to continue here, finish row 7, two knits, and then 2 purls of our repeat. And now on to row 8. Row 8 is where we do our increase. So on row 8, we're going to do a knit front and back to begin with, and that'll give us an extra stitch. So we'll go from 60 stitches to 61 stitches. If you are working a vintage stocking, you'll see a purl front and back at the end, but we're going to do a knit front and back in the beginning. So we're going to act like we're knitting here, and instead of dropping it off the needle like that, we're going to keep it on our needle and then twist our needle around and knit through the back loop. Always wrap your yarn clockwise. I'm going to bring it through the center and off the left needle. Now we're going to continue our repeat as in pattern. So our next stitch was a knit, and then we have 2 purl stitches. It's simple as that. We're just going to continue in pattern all the way to the end, and then we will have finished our row 8. So go ahead and pause it if you wish, and we'll see you at the end of this row. If you're working a vintage stocking, it's typically at the end of the row will be a purl front and back. But I just find that knitting front and back is a little bit easier and not so intimidating. Both are pretty easy to do. It's just more people are comfortable with knit. So we switched the pattern over. It really doesn't matter if you do this one increase at the beginning or the end. So that's your choice if you feel comfortable doing a purl at the end. Oh. Speaking of purls at the end, I just kept going with my knits. So this is the end of row 8 of our vintage stockings. Row 9 is our knit row, and we are going to change color to our main color. Again, I like to tuck my tail underneath my left hand, that way I don't accidentally start knitting with the tail instead of my working yarn. So this row is the beginning of our stockinette stitch. If you're familiar with our blog post and video tutorial on the stockinette, you'll know that you always knit one row and then purl the next row. So it goes back and forth, knit, purl, knit, purl. The rest of the stocking is going to be worked in stockinette. So here we're finishing our knit row, row 9, and then row 10 is going to be our purl row. Again, feel free to fast forward, pause, or review some of the support videos that are available in our blog. You can see here we knit one row, we purled the next row, we're well on our way to working our stockinette stitches. Versus waiting for me to get down to row 41, I want to show you how to do the first decreases. So we're going to set this aside, and then we're going to use a sample. This here I'm using Mary Maxim Starlet in the color Medium Taupe. And then you can see I've already started a sample. On the bottom, we did knit front and back to do our increases, and at the top we are doing knit 2 together, and we're doing PSSO. PSSO stands for Pass Slip Stitch Over. So we want to make sure we're on the right side. When you do the knit 2 together and the PSSO, you want to be working the knit side. So let's do our purls, that way we're working on the knit side. So we're going to purl 5 stitches. Alright, and let's flip on over to the knit side. And we zoomed it in so you can get a little bit of a better look. When you start working on the knit 2 together, it's worked the same as if you were to regularly knit. Instead of knitting through one stitch, you're just going to kind of put the stitches together and slip your needle through both stitches and knit as usual. There is a video of this in the blog if you need extra support. You just slip that right off your needle. We're going to knit the next stitch, and then we're going to work a PSSO. Instead of knitting, we're just going to slip the stitch onto our needle. So go ahead and slip the stitch on. You're going to knit the next stitch, and then you're going to take the slipped stitch and just pass it over the knit stitch that you just knit. And it just drops right off the needle and decreases by 1. Nice and neat, right? I think I actually prefer the PSSO, the pass slip stitch over, versus the knit 2 together. It just seems like it looks nicer. Let us know what you think. Make sure to post progress photos of your Christmas stockings. We can't wait to see them. We can't wait to see them on your mantles at Christmas time. Make sure to tag us. We would love to see your work. And we hope that you can bring this wonderful Mary Maxim tradition to your home, especially if this is your first stocking. We're so excited to be able to have this opportunity to bring it to your family as well. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media profiles, and happy crafting!